What if the ancient world was never as primitive as we were taught? Because scattered across the planet are objects that should not exist. Machines built centuries too early. Materials we still struggle to reproduce. Structures so precise that modern engineers still argue over how they were made. And the deeper archaeologists dig, the stranger the timeline becomes. Because some ancient discoveries do not look like the beginning of civilization. They look like the remains of something already advanced. The Antikythera Mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers searching the floor of the Mediterranean Sea near a small Greek island discovered the wreckage of an ancient ship. At first, it looked ordinary. Broken statues, coins, pottery. Then someone noticed a lump of green corroded bronze fused into the rock. For months, nobody paid attention to it. Then the gears became visible. Inside the corrosion was a machine. Not decorative, not symbolic, mechanical. When researchers cleaned the fragments, they realized they were looking at an object unlike anything ever discovered from the ancient world. A system of interlocking bronze gears with teeth cut at astonishing precision. More than 30 gears, some smaller than a coin, all designed to move together in perfect mathematical relationships. The shipwreck dated to roughly 100 BC. That immediately created a problem. Because according to the accepted technological timeline, machinery this sophisticated should not have existed for another 1,000 years. Researchers eventually discovered what the machine did. It predicted eclipses, tracked the movement of planets, calculated lunar cycles, possibly even mapped Olympic Games dates. It was essentially an ancient analog computer, a portable astronomical calculator built more than 2,000 years ago. Even more disturbing was what came next. Scientists realized this machine was too advanced to be the first of its kind. Complex technology does not appear fully formed. You do not go from wooden tools to precision gear systems overnight, which means the Antikythera mechanism almost certainly belonged to a longer lost tradition of engineering that has completely vanished from history. And that raises a dangerous question. If ancient civilizations could build machines like this 2,000 years ago, what else did they know? The Longyu Caves. In 1992, a farmer in China named Wu Anai decided to drain a pond. His neighbors thought he was wasting his time. The pond had always been there. Local legends claimed it was bottomless. But after 17 days of pumping water, the impossible appeared beneath the surface. A massive underground chamber, then another, then another. Eventually, 24 enormous caves were discovered hidden beneath the earth, each one carved with astonishing precision. The walls were covered in perfectly consistent chisel marks, angled in identical patterns across every surface. The ceilings were supported by carefully placed columns. The chambers stretched across nearly 30,000 square meters, and all of it had supposedly been carved by hand over 2,000 years ago. Here is the part that disturbs historians. Ancient China documented almost everything: wars, floods, harvests, royal ceremonies, astronomical events. Yet there is not a single surviving record describing the construction of the Longyou Caves. Nothing. No tools were found, no bodies, no inscriptions, no explanation for why thousands of workers would spend years excavating over 1 million cubic meters of stone underground. Engineers studying the caves remain unsettled by the consistency of the construction. The angles are unusually precise. The support systems are structurally intelligent, and the repeating chisel patterns suggest an obsessive standardization that feels strangely modern. The caves exist, But the civilization that built them left behind almost no explanation for why. And sometimes, that silence becomes more unsettling than the discovery itself. The Baghdad Battery. In 1936, workers digging near Baghdad uncovered a small clay jar buried in the earth. At first glance, it looked insignificant, a simple ceramic vessel. But inside the jar was something strange: a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of acidic residue. When archaeologists reconstructed the object and added liquid electrolytes such as vinegar or grape juice, the device produced electrical current. Not much, but enough. The artifact became known as the Baghdad Battery. If the interpretation is correct, it means people living nearly 2,000 years ago may have discovered primitive electricity long before the modern age. Some researchers believe the device could have been used for electroplating gold onto silver jewelry. Others think it may have had medical or ritual purposes. Skeptics argue it could simply be a storage container with unrelated components. That skepticism matters. But the design continues to bother researchers because the combination works too perfectly to ignore. And if ancient civilizations truly experimented with electricity, even in primitive form, then the technological timeline begins shifting again. Not dramatically, but enough to make historians uncomfortable. Roman concrete. Modern concrete has a problem. It cracks, it weakens, and eventually it fails. But along the coastlines of the Mediterranean, Roman harbors built over 2,000 years ago are still standing against crashing seawater. Modern engineers could not understand why. Because seawater normally destroys concrete over time, Roman concrete seemed to become stronger. For years, scientists studied samples from ancient Roman structures, trying to understand the secret. What they discovered shocked them. The Romans accidentally created a self-healing chemical reaction inside the material. When seawater entered tiny cracks, minerals formed and reinforced the structure instead of weakening it. Modern laboratories have tried replicating the process, and in some ways, the ancient formula still outperforms modern equivalents. Think about that for a moment. An empire without computers, without industrial factories, without modern chemistry, created a building material durable enough to survive for millennia, while many modern structures begin collapsing within decades. That realization creates a strange feeling, not because the Romans were primitive, but because they may have mastered techniques we later forgot. The Pyramids of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built roughly 4,500 years ago. It contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 70 tons. The structure is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy. Its base is nearly perfectly level, and the internal chambers show signs of cutting precision that continue to fuel debate among engineers. Mainstream archaeology explains the pyramids through ramps, manpower, copper tools, and extraordinary organization. And much of that evidence is legitimate. But even professional builders admit the scale remains staggering, especially when considering the time frame. Because the Great Pyramid was constructed during an era when the wheel was not widely used in Egypt. There were no cranes, no steel tools, no powered machinery. Yet somehow ancient workers transported, lifted, aligned, and assembled millions of stones with astonishing precision. Even more intriguing are certain granite cuts inside the pyramid complex. Granite is an extremely hard stone. Some drill marks and cuts appear surprisingly advanced for copper tooling alone. Modern experimental archaeologists have shown it is possible using ancient methods. But the process is brutally slow and extraordinarily difficult, which only deepens the mystery of scale. The pyramids are not impossible. That is what makes them unsettling. They are possible, just far beyond what most people imagine ancient civilizations could realistically organize. And maybe that gap between expectation and reality is where the mystery truly lives. The Lycurgus Cup. In a dark museum room in London sits a Roman glass cup, unlike anything else from the ancient world. Under normal light, it appears green. But when light shines through it from behind, the cup suddenly turns deep red. For centuries, nobody understood how it worked. Then modern scientists examined the glass under powerful microscopes. Embedded inside the material were tiny particles of gold and silver, engineered at the nanoscopic level. Nanotechnology. Inside a Roman artifact created roughly 1600 years ago. The Romans obviously did not understand quantum optics the way modern scientists do. But somehow artisans discovered a method capable of manipulating light, using particles thousands of times smaller than a grain of sand. Even today, recreating the exact effect requires advanced scientific understanding, which raises another uncomfortable possibility. Ancient craftsmen may have discovered sophisticated techniques experimentally, without fully understanding the science behind them. Knowledge through repetition, through tradition, through lost craftsmanship. And once those techniques disappeared, the knowledge disappeared with them. The Iron Pillar of Delhi. In India stands a massive iron pillar, over 1600 years old, exposed to rain, humidity, heat, storms, and almost no rust. Modern metallurgists studying the pillar discovered something unusual. The iron contains an extraordinarily pure composition, combined with phosphorus-rich forging techniques that created a protective passive layer across the surface. In simple terms, the pillar resists corrosion naturally, and it has done so for centuries. What fascinates researchers is not that ancient Indians worked with iron. That part is well established. It is the scale and purity of the achievement. Creating massive corrosion-resistant iron structures without modern blast furnaces should have been extremely difficult. Yet somehow they did it. And once again, we encounter the same pattern repeating throughout history. Ancient knowledge appearing far more advanced than expected, then partially disappearing. The Sanxingdui artifacts. In 1986, construction workers in China uncovered a buried civilization nobody expected to find. Inside sacrificial pits, there were thousands of bronze, gold, and jade objects, unlike anything archaeologists had ever seen. There were massive bronze masks with protruding eyes. There were towering statues nearly 8 feet tall. There was a bronze tree over 13 feet high. The artifacts dated back roughly 3,000 years. But there was a problem. Nothing about them matched the known artistic evolution of ancient China. There was no gradual development leading to these designs. There was no obvious predecessor culture. The objects appeared suddenly, already sophisticated, already strange. Even the bronze casting techniques seemed unusually advanced for a regional civilization supposedly isolated from the major centers of the ancient world. And then, the civilization vanished. There was no written language explaining who they were. There were almost no human remains, just artifacts, buried carefully underground, before disappearing into history. In 2021, archaeologists reopened excavations at the site. More pits emerged, more artifacts, more questions, and the deeper researchers dig into Sanxingdui, the harder it becomes to force ancient history into a clean, linear progression. Because civilizations do not always rise neatly. Sometimes they appear suddenly, sometimes they vanish completely, And sometimes they leave behind objects that feel less like archaeology and more like evidence from a forgotten chapter of humanity. The antediluvian question. Maybe ancient technology does not mean skyscrapers, computers, or machines that look like ours. Maybe that assumption is the mistake, because throughout history, we keep finding evidence of specialized knowledge appearing earlier than expected. Precision engineering, advanced metallurgy, astronomical calculation, chemical experimentation, large-scale construction. And the deeper we investigate the ancient world, the more we discover that human history may not be a straight line upward. It may be a cycle. Knowledge discovered, knowledge mastered, knowledge lost. Then rediscovered centuries later by civilizations who believe they are the first to uncover it. And that possibility changes the way we look at the ruins around us. Because maybe ancient people were not primitive humans slowly learning civilization. Maybe some of them were the survivors of worlds that had already collapsed long before recorded history began. And if that is true, then somewhere beneath deserts, jungles, oceans, and ice, there may still be discoveries waiting that could completely rewrite the story of humanity. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more ancient mysteries and impossible discoveries.